The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects as Marcus Chen stared at his computer screen, the cursor blinking mockingly in the empty email compose window. 23 hours and 14 minutes. That's how long he had left before the biggest bonus of his career would hit his bank account. $85,000 that would finally let him breathe again, maybe even take Sarah on that honeymoon they'd been postponing for 3 years. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly from the fourth cup of coffee he'd consumed since dawn. The lab around him hummed with the familiar symphony of innovation. Centrifuges whirring, computers processing terabytes of data, and the soft footsteps of his colleagues who had no idea their star biotech engineer was about to become a memory. "Still here, Marcus?" Dr. Elena Vasquez peered over the partition that separated their workstations. Her kind eyes creased with concern. At 52, she'd mentored half the engineers in the building, including Marcus during his first nervous weeks at Meridian Biotech 5 years ago. Her graying hair was pulled back in its signature bun, and she clutched a steaming mug that read "World's Okayest Scientist," a gag gift from her graduate students that had become her favorite. "Still here, Marcus." Chen stared at his computer screen, the cursor blinking mockingly in the empty email compose window. 23 hours and 14 minutes. That's how long he had left before the biggest bonus of his career would hit his bank account. $85,000 that would finally let him breathe again, maybe even take Sarah on that honeymoon they'd been postponing for 3 years. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling slightly from the fourth cup of coffee he'd consumed since dawn. The lab around him hummed with the familiar symphony of innovation. Centrifuges whirring, computers processing terabytes of data, and the soft footsteps of his colleagues who had no idea their star biotech engineer was about to become a memory. "Still here, Marcus?" Dr. Elena Vasquez peered over the partition that separated their workstations. Her kind eyes creased with concern. At 52, she'd mentored half the engineers in the building, including Marcus during his first nervous weeks at Meridian Biotech 5 years ago. Her graying hair was pulled back in its signature bun, and she clutched a steaming mug that read "World's Okayest Scientist," a gag gift from her graduate students that had become her favorite. "Just putting the finishing touches on the neural interface protocol," Marcus replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The weight of what he knew pressed against his chest like a stone. "I want to make sure everything's perfect for tomorrow's board presentation." Elena's expression softened. She'd been in the industry long enough to recognize the signs of a brilliant mind carrying more than just technical burdens. "You know, I've been in labs for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone pour themselves into a project the way you have with the MindBridge system. Your parents would be proud." The mention of his parents sent a familiar ache through Marcus's chest. Dr. James and Linda Chen had been pioneering neuroscientists themselves, killed in a car accident during his junior year of college. Their unfinished research on neurorehabilitation had become his North Star, driving him through graduate school and into the biotech world where he'd spent the last 5 years turning their theoretical framework into reality. "Thanks, Elena," he whispered as he turned back to his screen, where lines of code danced like digital poetry. Each algorithm represented months of 18-hour days, weekends sacrificed, and social events declined. The MindBridge neural interface wasn't just a product, it was his parents' legacy, filtered through his own obsessive dedication to perfection. The lab door hissed open, and Marcus's stomach clenched as he recognized the footsteps. Measured, authoritative, expensive leather soles clicking against polished concrete. Richard Blackwood, CEO of Meridian Biotech, approached with his usual entourage of vice presidents and legal advisors. At 61, Blackwood commanded respect through a combination of Harvard credentials, ruthless business acumen, and the kind of presence that made billion-dollar decisions seem as casual as ordering coffee. "Marcus, just the man I wanted to see." Blackwood's voice carried that trademark blend of warmth and calculation that had charmed investors out of $500 million in funding. "How's our golden boy doing on this momentous eve?" The phrase golden boy had always made Marcus uncomfortable, but tonight it felt like a funeral dirge. He minimized his screen and turned to face his boss, noting how the fluorescent light seemed to cast shadows in all the wrong places on Blackwood's angular face. "The system is ready, sir. All protocols optimized, safety margins exceeded, and the patient's simulation data shows a 98.7% success rate for neural pathway restoration." Outstanding, Blackwood smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Walk with me for a moment, would you? They moved toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the San Francisco Bay. The city sparkled below them like a circuit board. Each light represented dreams, ambitions, and the relentless pursuit of innovation that defined Silicon Valley. Marcus had spent countless late nights at this very window, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors that reminded him of the neural pathway visualizations he'd created for the MindBridge interface. You know, Marcus, when we hired you 5 years ago, I saw something special. Your parents' research was groundbreaking, but you've taken it to places they never could have imagined. The MindBridge system will change medicine forever. Thank you, sir. That means everything to me. I'm sure it does. Which is why what I'm about to tell you is going to be particularly difficult. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marcus felt the familiar sensation of freefall that he'd experienced only twice in his life, when the police officer knocked on his dorm room door with news of his parents' accident, and when Sarah said yes to his marriage proposal on the Golden Gate Bridge 2 years ago. This felt distinctly like the former. Sir?
We've had to make some difficult decisions about the future direction of the company, Blackwood continued, his reflection in the window appearing to speak to Marcus's reflection, as if they were having a conversation in some parallel universe. The board feels that as we move into the commercial phase of MindBridge, we need leadership with more seasoned business experience. The words hit Marcus like physical blows. I don't understand. The launch is tomorrow. We've spent 5 years building this. My research, my parents' research, will continue to be valuable intellectual property of Meridian Biotech. Dr. Harrison Williams from Johns Hopkins will be taking over as lead researcher. He has extensive experience in medical device commercialization. Marcus's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Harrison Williams, the same Harrison Williams who had publicly criticized his parents' research in academic journals, calling it theoretical nonsense and a waste of NSF funding? The same man who had somehow failed to produce any significant innovations of his own, despite decades in the field? You're firing me? The words came out as a statement rather than a question. We're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated, but we're prepared to offer a generous severance package that includes... What about my bonus? The $85,000 bonus for completing the MindBridge project? Blackwood's pause lasted exactly 3 seconds too long. Unfortunately, bonuses are only paid to active employees. Since your termination is effective immediately, you won't be eligible for the year-end performance bonus. The fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in rhythm with Marcus's pulse. 23 hours. He'd been 23 hours away from financial security, from finally being able to afford the fertility treatments that Sarah needed, from paying off the mountain of student loans that had haunted him since graduate school. This is about the patent, isn't it? Marcus said quietly. Blackwood's reflection didn't flinch. I'm not sure what you mean. Patent Application 11247891, the core neural interface algorithm, the one I filed independently before I joined Meridian based on my parents' research, the one that makes MindBridge possible. All research conducted under Meridian's employment falls under company intellectual property, Blackwood replied, his voice taking on the rehearsed cadence of legal doctrine. I'm sure our attorneys can help clarify any confusion you might have about ownership. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Marcus had seen what Meridian's legal team could do. They'd crushed smaller biotech companies like insects, buried inventors under mountains of litigation until they surrendered their patents for pennies on the dollar. But Marcus had something they didn't expect: proof. Hidden in the deepest folders of his personal backup drives, encrypted with algorithms he'd learned from a paranoid cybersecurity professor, lay the evidence of his independent research. Notebooks scanned and time-stamped, code repositories with commit histories, even video logs of his late-night breakthrough sessions. 5 years of meticulous documentation that proved the core of MindBridge existed before he'd ever set foot in Meridian's labs. I understand, Marcus said finally. his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest. "When do I need to clean out my desk?" "Security will escort you out tonight. We'll have your personal items shipped to your home address." 23 hours and 7 minutes, until his bonus vested. Marcus looked back at his workstation, where Elena pretended not to be listening, where his computer screen still glowed with the code that would make Meridian Biotech hundreds of millions of dollars. In the distance, he could see the conference room where tomorrow's board presentation would unfold, where executives would celebrate the launch of technology that bore his DNA in every line of code. "One question," Marcus said as Blackwood began to walk away. "Does Williams know about the quantum entanglement protocols in the neural mapping subroutine?" Blackwood stopped, his expensive shoes squeaking slightly against the floor. "I'm sure Dr. Williams will familiarize himself with all aspects of the technology." "I know he will. Good luck with the launch tomorrow, Mr. Blackwood."
As the CEO disappeared around the corner with his entourage, Marcus returned to his desk for the last time. Elena appeared at his elbow, her face a mask of concern and barely contained fury. "That bastard!" she whispered, glancing around to make sure they wouldn't be overheard. 5 years you've given this place, 5 years of your life, and they do this the night before your bonus vests? It's business, Elena. Just business. Bullshit. Her usually gentle demeanor cracked, revealing the steel beneath. I know what this project means to you. I know about your parents, and I know Richard Blackwood is about to make the biggest mistake of his career. Marcus managed a genuine smile for the first time in hours. Take care of yourself, Elena. And maybe find a new place to put your talents. I have a feeling Meridian is going to have some challenges ahead. She squeezed his shoulder with the fierce grip of someone who'd spent 3 decades lifting heavy lab equipment. You're going to land on your feet, Marcus Chen. Brilliant minds like yours always do. As security arrived to escort him from the building that had been his second home for 5 years, Marcus took one last look at the MindBridge prototype sitting in its climate-controlled case. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would stand before a room full of investors and medical professionals, promising them a revolution in neural rehabilitation technology. He would point to the sleek device and the impressive demonstration results, claiming credit for innovation that had consumed Marcus's every waking moment. What Blackwood didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that Marcus had built a failsafe into the system, not sabotage exactly, but a requirement for continuous authentication that only the original patent holder could provide. Without it, MindBridge was just an expensive paperweight, waiting for its first critical system failure. 23 hours and 3 minutes, until the bonus that would never come. But as Marcus walked through the glass doors of Meridian Biotech for the last time, carrying only a small box of personal items, he felt something unexpected: hope. The elevator descended through floors of laboratories where other brilliant minds worked tirelessly to push the boundaries of human knowledge. Some of them would face their own Richard Blackwoods someday. Others would have the luxury of seeing their innovations reach the world under their own names. But all of them were part of something larger than corporate profits and quarterly earnings reports. They were part of the endless human quest to heal, to understand, to transcend the limitations of flesh and circumstance. Marcus's parents had been part of that quest. Elena was part of it. And despite Richard Blackwood's best efforts, Marcus Chen was still part of it too. The question now was what he would do with the 23 hours and 2 minutes he had left before tomorrow changed everything. Marcus sat in his Honda Civic in the Meridian Biotech parking garage for 17 minutes, watching the digital clock on his dashboard count down the minutes until midnight. 23:01:47, 23:01:46, 23:01:45. Each second felt like a small death, a future dissolving into nothingness, while the city hummed around him in blissful ignorance. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did the late meeting go? Still coming home tonight? Make your favorite soup." The normalcy of her words felt surreal against the backdrop of his professional execution. She had no idea that their carefully constructed 5-year plan, fertility treatments by spring, house down payment by summer,
Maybe even that sabbatical she'd mentioned where they could travel to Italy and visit the labs where some of the greatest neuroscientists had worked had just evaporated like morning fog. The drive home to their Mission District apartment took him through the heart of San Francisco, past the glowing towers where other dreams were being born and buried in boardrooms he'd never see. The city had always felt full of possibility to Marcus, each street corner representing a potential breakthrough, every coffee shop a place where the next world-changing conversation might unfold. Tonight, it felt like a beautiful tomb, gorgeous and cold and indifferent to the small tragedies playing out in its shadows. Their apartment building was a converted Victorian that had somehow survived both the 1906 earthquake and the tech boom gentrification, its weathered facade painted in layers of hopes and disappointments from a century of residence. Marcus climbed the 3 flights of stairs slowly, his legs heavy with exhaustion and dread. Each step brought him closer to the moment when he would have to look Sarah in the eyes and explain how their future had been stolen by expensive suits and legal fine print. She was curled on their second-hand couch when he entered, laptop open, grading papers from the high school physics classes she taught in Oakland. Her dark hair fell across her face as she concentrated, and Marcus felt the familiar surge of love mixed with inadequacy that had defined much of their relationship. Sarah Martin as Chen was brilliant in ways that didn't require patents or stock options. She could explain quantum mechanics to teenagers who'd never seen the inside of a real laboratory, make them believe they could split atoms or bend space-time with nothing more than curiosity and determination. "There's my workaholic husband," she said without looking up from her screen, but her smile was warm enough to fill their tiny living room. "How was the big pre-launch meeting? Ready to be rich and famous tomorrow?" Marcus hung his jacket on the door hook they'd installed crooked 2 years ago and still hadn't fixed. Such a small thing, but it represented everything about their life together. Imperfect, improvised, held together by love and stubbornness rather than money or status. It was eventful. Something in his tone made her look up sharply. Sarah had grown up in a family where bad news always arrived with careful euphemisms and measured voices. Her father had lost his job at the Ford plant the same way. A quiet conversation, a gentle explanation of restructuring, and then 23 years of service reduced to a cardboard box of personal items and a handshake from a man in a suit. "Marcus?" She closed the laptop and gave him her full attention. "What happened?" He sat beside her on the couch, close enough to smell the lavender shampoo she'd used since college, close enough to see the small scar above her left eyebrow from the childhood accident that had first sparked her interest in physics. She'd wanted to understand the trajectory of the baseball that had knocked her unconscious. "They let me go." The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a fire that had just consumed everything they'd built. Sarah's face went through a sequence of emotions: confusion, disbelief, anger, and finally the kind of quiet calculation that meant she was already 3 steps ahead, already planning how they would survive this. "When?" she asked. "Tonight. Security escorted me out at 8:47 p.m. "The bonus?" "Gone. Active employees only." Sarah leaned back against the couch cushions, her hands pressed flat against her thighs in a gesture Marcus recognized from their worst fights, the way she steadied herself when the ground seemed to be shifting beneath her feet. $85,000. Gone. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I know what that money meant. The fertility treatments, the house. Fuck the house," she said quietly. And Marcus blinked in surprise. Sarah rarely cursed, reserved profanity for moments of genuine crisis. Fuck Richard Blackwood and fuck Meridian Biotech. This is about them stealing your life's work, not about money. This was why he'd married her. Not because she was beautiful, though she was. Not because she was brilliant, though she was that too. But because in moments like this, when the rest of the world would have focused on practical concerns, lost income, uncertain future, shattered plans, Sarah saw straight to the heart of the injustice. "They're launching MindBridge tomorrow. My parents' research, 5 years of my life, and they're going to pretend I never existed." "Tell me about the patent." Sarah shifted to face him fully,
her teacher's voice emerging. "Walk me through it like I'm one of your engineering students." Marcus had told her pieces of the story over the years, but never the full narrative. How his parents' research had pointed towards something revolutionary but incomplete. How he'd spend his final year of graduate school obsessively filling in the gaps, working in a basement lab at MIT, while his advisor thought he was chasing theoretical ghosts. How the breakthrough had come at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday in February when he'd finally understood how quantum entanglement principles could stabilize neural interface connections. "I filed the core patent application 3 months before I started at Meridian. Patent 11247819 covers the fundamental algorithm that makes long-term neural interface possible. Without it, you can connect to brain tissue for maybe a few hours before cascade failures destroy the connection and potentially damage the patient. And Meridian knows about your patent. They have to. Their legal team would have done comprehensive IP searches before investing hundreds of millions of dollars in development. They're betting they can either invalidate it or bury me under so much litigation that I'll give up." Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Her dark eyes focused on something beyond their living room walls. Marcus knew that look. It was the same expression she wore when working through complex physics problems, the kind that required holding multiple variables in mental suspension while testing different solutions. "What happens if they launch without a license to your patent?" she asked finally. "Legally, I could sue them for infringement, but patent litigation takes years and costs millions. They know I can't afford a fight like that." "I wasn't asking about it legally," she said. "I was asking about technology. What happens to MindBridge if they don't have access to your complete algorithm?" I felt a slow smile spread across my face. "It fails, catastrophically, probably during the first extended demonstration."
How catastrophically? Not dangerous to patients, if that's what you're worried about. I built safeguards into the system. But embarrassing enough that every investor and medical professional in that room will question whether Meridian has any idea what they're actually trying to sell. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes bright with the kind of intensity she usually reserved for particularly elegant physics equations. "Marcus, honey, I think you're looking at this wrong." "What do you mean?" "You're thinking like an engineer, all technical solutions and legal frameworks." She reached for his hands, her fingers warm against his palms. "But this isn't just about patents and algorithms. This is about justice, and sometimes justice requires a little bit of theater." Over the next 3 hours, as they shared the soup that had gone cold on the stove and sketched plans on the back of Sarah's graded papers, Marcus began to see his situation through his wife's eyes. She had grown up in a family that understood how power worked in America, not through fairness or merit, but through leverage and timing and the willingness to make noise at exactly the right moment. "My dad spent 20 years believing that if he just worked hard enough, if he was just loyal enough, Ford would take care of him," Sarah said, as they moved to their bedroom around midnight. "And you know what he got? A pink slip and a pension that disappeared in bankruptcy court." Marcus nodded, understanding. Sarah's father had died 2 years ago, still believing that the system would reward honest work and dedication. It was a beautiful faith, but it had left him broken and bitter in his final years. "Your parents were scientists," Sarah continued, settling into bed beside him. "They believed in truth and evidence and peer review. But you're not just a scientist anymore, Marcus. You're an inventor who got screwed by a corporation. And inventors who get screwed by corporations have options that scientists don't." "Like what?" "Like making sure the whole world is watching when Meridian's house of cards falls down." They lay in the darkness of their bedroom, the city's ambient glow filtering through curtains they'd been meaning to replace for months. Marcus could hear Sarah's breathing gradually slow toward sleep, but his mind raced with possibilities. For 5 years, he'd played by Meridian's rules, trusting that excellence and innovation would be rewarded. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would discover that some rules only work when both sides agree to follow them. At 2:17 a.m., Marcus's phone lit up with an email notification. The sender was Dr. Harrison Williams, his replacement, writing from what appeared to be the Meridian labs. Marcus, hope there are no hard feelings about the transition. Could you clarify the quantum entanglement implementation in the neural mapping subroutine? Documentation seems incomplete. Best, Harrison. Marcus stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without reply. Harrison Williams, the same man who had spent a decade criticizing his parents' work, was now scrambling to understand technology that took Marcus years to develop. The hubris was breathtaking, and it confirmed what Marcus had suspected. Meridian's leadership had no idea how complex the MindBridge system really was. Sarah stirred beside him. Everything okay? Better than okay. I think tomorrow is going to be very interesting. As he finally drifted towards sleep, Marcus's mind wandered to the story Sarah sometimes told her physics students about Galileo's trial before the Inquisition, how the great scientist had been forced to recant his heretical theories about the Earth moving around the sun. But, according to legend, as he left the courtroom, Galileo muttered under his breath, "And yet it moves." The truth had a way of asserting itself regardless of what powerful men in expensive suits decided was convenient. MindBridge was built on foundations of pure science and innovative engineering, but it was also built on something more fragile, the assumption that Marcus Chen would remain silent and grateful for whatever crumbs Meridian chose to offer him. Tomorrow, Richard Blackwood would discover that some assumptions are more dangerous than others. 22:43:12, 22:43:11, 22:43:10. The countdown continued, but Marcus was no longer watching the clock with dread. Instead, he found himself looking forward to 8 a.m. when the Meridian Biotech board presentation would begin and the real show would start. The morning sun painted San Francisco's skyline in deceptive gold as Marcus sat in his kitchen, laptop open to a live stream of the Meridian Biotech press conference. Sarah had already left for school, kissing him goodbye with the fierce tenderness reserved for soldiers heading into battle. "Make them pay," she had whispered against his ear, and the words had felt like armor. At exactly 8 a.m., Richard Blackwood stepped up to the podium in the Meridian glass-walled conference center, the MindBridge prototype gleaming under professional lighting behind him. The audience was impressive, venture capitalists whose combined net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations, medical professionals from Johns Hopkins and Mayo Clinic, and technology journalists whose articles could make or break billion-dollar companies with a single headline. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. "Ladies and gentlemen," Blackwood began, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man who had never doubted his place in the world. "Today marks a revolutionary moment in medical history. The MindBridge neural interface system represents 5 years of intensive research and development, bringing together the finest minds in biotech engineering to solve one of medicine's greatest challenges." Marcus felt his jaw clench at the phrase, "finest minds." Not a single mention of his name, his parents' foundational research, or the thousands of hours he'd spent perfecting algorithms that made this moment possible. Dr. Harrison Williams sat in the front row, nodding sagely as if he'd been part of the project from the beginning, rather than arriving 48 hours ago. "The implications are staggering," Blackwood continued, gesturing toward charts that displayed Marcus's data, his breakthrough statistics, his years of painstaking validation. Paralyzed patients regaining motor function, stroke victims recovering speech, traumatic brain injury survivors returning to normal lives. This isn't just medical advancement, this is miracles made manifest through technology. The demonstration was scheduled to begin at 8:30 a.m. with a live test on a volunteer patient who'd lost motor function in her left arm following a motorcycle accident. Marcus knew her case intimately. He'd spent months calibrating the system specifically for her neural patterns. What the audience didn't know was that the calibration required continuous authentication through quantum entanglement protocols that existed nowhere in Meridian's official documentation. At 8:27 a.m., Marcus opened his own laptop and navigated to a secure server he'd maintained independently throughout his employment. The quantum authentication system was elegant in its simplicity. Every 6 minutes, the MindBridge interface needed to verify its connection to the original patent holder's quantum signature. Without that verification, the system would gracefully degrade, displaying increasingly erratic behavior until complete shutdown. Marcus had built the system this way not out of malice, but out of scientific necessity. Quantum entanglement was fragile, requiring constant monitoring and adjustment by someone who understood its theoretical underpinnings. Harrison Williams might have impressive credentials, but he'd spent the last decade dismissing quantum mechanics as impractical fringe science. Now, Dr. Williams will demonstrate the MindBridge system's capabilities. Williams approached the patient, a brave 28-year-old teacher named Maria Santos, who'd been paralyzed from the chest down for 2 years, maintaining the kind of optimistic determination that made her a perfect candidate for the program. Marcus had spent hours talking with her during calibration sessions, learning about her dreams of returning to rock climbing, her fiancé who'd proposed while she was still in the hospital, her absolute faith that science would find a way to restore what trauma had taken away. The MindBridge interface attached to her skull with the precision Marcus had spent years perfecting, its neural probes making contact with brain tissue according to specifications he'd written in code that Meridian's team was still struggling to understand. For the first few minutes, everything worked exactly as designed. Maria's paralyzed left arm responded to her mental commands, lifting slowly but steadily as the audience gasped in amazement. "As you can see," Williams said, his voice filled with borrowed confidence, "the neural pathway restoration is immediate and intuitive. The patient simply thinks about movement, and MindBridge translates those thoughts into physical action." Marcus checked his watch. 8:33 a.m. The first authentication window would close in approximately 90 seconds. At 8:34:47, the MindBridge interface began to flicker. It was subtle at first, just a slight delay between Maria's mental commands and her arm's response. Williams frowned, tapping the interface's control panel with the kind of confidence that comes from not understanding what might go wrong. The audience leaned forward, sensing that something was shifting, but not yet sure what they were witnessing. "Minor calibration adjustment," Williams announced, his voice still steady, but with an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "Neural interfaces require constant optimization to maintain peak performance." At 8:35:32, Maria's arm began to tremor uncontrollably. "What's happening?" she asked, her voice carrying across the suddenly silent conference room. The arm that had been responding perfectly to her thoughts now moved in random jerky motions that had nothing to do with her intentions. "Dr. Williams, what's wrong?" Williams was frantically typing on his tablet, running through diagnostic protocols that Marcus had written but never fully documented. The quantum authentication system had entered its fail-safe mode, gradually disconnecting from the neural interface to prevent any potential harm to the patient. It was exactly what Marcus had designed it to do, prioritize safety over performance, ensuring that no amount of corporate pressure could risk Maria's well-being.
"We're experiencing a minor technical difficulty," Blackwood intervened, stepping toward the podium with the kind of smooth authority that had made him millions in previous ventures. "These systems are incredibly complex, and real-world demonstrations sometimes reveal optimization opportunities that weren't apparent in laboratory settings. But the damage was already spreading beyond the demonstration platform." Dr. Jennifer Walsh from Johns Hopkins stood up in the audience, her expression shifting from impressed to concerned. "Mr. Blackwood, this patient appears to be experiencing involuntary muscle spasms. Shouldn't the demonstration be terminated immediately?" The system has built-in safety protocols, Williams began. Then why isn't it working? Dr. Walsh interrupted. If your safety protocols were functioning properly, the interface would have disengaged automatically when aberrant signals were detected. Marcus felt a moment of professional pride. Dr. Walsh understood exactly what she was seeing, a system that was designed to fail gracefully, but was being operated by people who didn't understand its underlying principles. The quantum authentication protocols were working perfectly, protecting Maria from potential harm while simultaneously exposing Meridian's fundamental ignorance about their own product. At 8:37:15, the MindBridge interface shut down completely. Maria's arm fell limply to her side, and she looked up at Williams with confusion and growing fear. What happened? Did something break? Am I going to be okay? You're fine, Marcus said quietly to his laptop screen. The system is protecting you exactly the way it's supposed to. But the audience didn't know that. What they saw was a revolutionary medical device failing catastrophically during its debut demonstration, with patient safety apparently compromised by inadequate safeguards. Murmurs rippled through the conference room as investors exchanged worried glances and medical professionals began taking notes that would undoubtedly appear in journals questioning Meridian's development practices. Dr. Elena Vasquez stood up from her seat in the employee section, her face flushed with professional outrage. Richard, this is exactly what Marcus warned us might happen if the quantum entanglement protocols weren't properly maintained. The mention of Marcus's name sent visible tension through the room. Several journalists began typing furiously, recognizing the story that was unfolding. A fired engineer whose warnings had been ignored, a medical device that failed when its creator was no longer around to maintain it. I'm not sure what Dr. Vasquez is referring to, Blackwood replied smoothly, but his voice carried a new edge. Our engineering team has thoroughly reviewed all aspects of the MindBridge system. With respect, sir, Elena continued, and Marcus could hear the steel in her voice even through the live stream. The quantum authentication protocols are Marcus Chen's signature innovation. Harrison may be an excellent researcher, but he's publicly criticized quantum mechanics applications in neural interfaces. How could he possibly maintain systems based on principles he doesn't believe work? The room erupted in cross-conversations as the implications became clear. This wasn't just a technical failure, it was a personnel failure, a management failure, a fundamental misunderstanding of the relationship between innovation and the innovators who make it possible. Williams was now frantically trying to restart the MindBridge interface, but without quantum authentication, the system remained in protective shutdown. Every attempt to bypass the safeguards only confirmed what Elena had suggested. The people operating the device didn't understand how it actually worked. Ladies and gentlemen, Blackwood announced, raising his voice to regain control of the room, we're going to reschedule this demonstration to allow for additional system optimization. Dr. Santos, thank you for your participation. Our medical team will ensure you receive the highest standard of follow-up care. But the damage was already spreading beyond the conference room. Marcus watched as social media began lighting up with real-time reports from journalists in the audience. Hashtag MindBridge failure was trending within minutes, accompanied by video clips of Maria's involuntary muscle spasms and Williams's increasingly desperate attempts to troubleshoot systems he didn't understand. The financial markets responded with characteristic brutality. Meridian's stock price, which had opened at $127.43 in anticipation of the MindBridge launch, began dropping in real time as investors processed the implications of the demonstration failure. By 9:15 a.m., it had fallen to $98.72. By 9:30 a.m., it was approaching $85 and still falling. Marcus's phone rang at 9:33 a.m. The caller ID showed Elena Vasquez. Marcus, please tell me you're watching this. Every second. That was beautiful, Elena said, and he could hear the satisfaction in her voice. Absolutely beautiful. Harrison is up here running around like his hair's on fire, trying to find documentation that doesn't exist, while Richard screams at the legal team about patent violations. How's Maria?
She's fine. Scared and confused, but fine. The system protected her exactly the way it was designed to. Elena's voice softened. You know, I've been in this business for 30 years, and I've never seen a more elegant fail-safe system. Even in failure, your engineering prioritized patient safety. That was always the point. I know, and I think the world is starting to understand that too. By 10 a.m., the story had evolved beyond a simple product demonstration failure. Technology journalists were digging into Marcus's background, discovering his patents, his parents' research, and the suspicious timing of his termination. Medical professionals were questioning whether Meridian had adequate oversight of their development processes, while patent attorneys began speculating about potential intellectual property disputes. The most damaging coverage came from Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, a respected neural interface researcher at Stanford who had been following Marcus's work for years. Her live-tweeted analysis cut through the technical complexity with surgical precision. What we witnessed today wasn't a system failure. It was a system working exactly as designed by an engineer who understood that patient safety must always come first. The question is, why didn't Meridian's current team understand their own technology? At 10:47 a.m., Marcus received an unexpected phone call from a number he didn't recognize. Mr. Chen, this is Jessica Park from TechCrunch. I'm working on a story about this morning's Meridian demonstration, and I was hoping you might have time for a brief interview. Marcus glanced at Sarah's note on the refrigerator. Remember, sometimes justice requires a little theater. The stage was set, the audience was watching, and Meridian had just handed him the perfect opening line. I'd be happy to speak with you, Miss Park. The interview, conducted over the phone while Marcus sat in the kitchen where he'd planned his parents' funeral 5 years earlier, lasted 37 minutes. He was careful to stick to facts, technical explanations, and documented timelines. He didn't need to embellish or exaggerate. The truth was damning enough. The quantum entanglement protocols are the heart of the MindBridge system, Marcus explained, his voice calm and professional. Without them, neural interfaces can only maintain stable connections for a few hours at most. I developed these protocols based on my parents' theoretical framework, and I filed the core patent 3 months before joining Meridian. And Meridian was aware of your patent when they hired you? They had to be. Patent searches are standard due diligence for any biotech company investing hundreds of millions in development. My patent application, 11,247,811, covers the fundamental algorithms that make long-term neural interfaces possible. But you were terminated 24 hours before your bonus vested? That's correct. My position was eliminated effective immediately, which meant I wasn't eligible for the year-end performance bonus tied to the MindBridge project. Jessica Park was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her typing rapidly in the background. Mr. Chen, are you saying that Meridian built their entire product around your patented technology, then fired you to avoid paying a bonus? I'm saying that the timing raises interesting questions about corporate priorities and ethical decision-making in the biotech industry. The article went live at 1:23 p.m. under the headline, "The Engineer They Couldn't Afford to Keep: How Meridian Biotech's Greed May Have Derailed a Medical Breakthrough." It was thorough, well-researched, and devastating in its implications. Within hours, it had been shared thousands of times and picked up by major news outlets hungry for a story that combined corporate malfeasance, medical innovation, and David versus Goliath drama. By 2 p.m., Meridian stock had fallen to $67.33, wiping out nearly $200 million in market capitalization. The volume of trading was unprecedented, suggesting that institutional investors were dumping their positions as fast as regulations would allow. Marcus's phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters, patent attorneys, biotech executives, and venture capitalists all wanted to understand how a company could be so reckless with both their talent and their technology.
Each conversation revealed new layers of corporate dysfunction that went far beyond his individual case. Dr. Michael Torres, a former Meridian researcher who had left the company 6 months earlier, called at 3:17 p.m. with information that made Marcus's situation seem almost trivial by comparison. "Marcus, I've been following the news today, and I think you should know, you're not the only one they've screwed over," Torres said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "They fired Janet Kim 2 weeks before her patent on the neuroprobe array was supposed to transfer to company ownership. And David Park? They eliminated his position the day before his stock options vested."
How many people are we talking about? At least 7 that I know of personally, maybe more. They've been systematically terminating key researchers just before major financial milestones, then claiming ownership of work that was developed independently. Marcus felt a cold fury building in his chest. This wasn't about his individual case anymore. It was about a pattern of corporate theft that had been going on for years. Brilliant minds pouring their lives into innovations, only to have their work stolen by executives who contributed nothing but legal maneuvering and timing manipulation. "Michael, would you be willing to go on record about this?" "Already talking to reporters," Torres replied. "This ends now." At 4:30 p.m., a second wave of articles began appearing, this time focused on Meridian's systematic exploitation of their research staff. The stories painted a picture of a company that had built its entire business model around recruiting brilliant inventors, extracting their innovations, and then discarding them before they could claim fair compensation. The financial markets responded with predictable savagery. Meridian's stock price fell below $50, triggering automatic trading halts as algorithms detected the rapid decline. Major institutional investors began issuing statements distancing themselves from the company, while medical device manufacturers that had partnered with Meridian scrambled to assess their own exposure to the unfolding scandal. But the real blow came at 5:47 p.m. when the FDA issued a statement announcing a formal review of Meridian's MindBridge approval process. In light of recent concerns about the company's development practices and quality control procedures, the statement read, "The FDA will be conducting a comprehensive audit of all documentation related to the MindBridge neural interface system." Marcus knew what that meant. Months or possibly years of regulatory review, during which Meridian couldn't launch their product or generate revenue from the technology they'd stolen. The $300 million they'd invested in development and manufacturing would sit idle while government investigators examined every aspect of their operations. At 6:15 p.m., his phone rang with a call from an unknown number with a 415 area code. "Marcus, this is Richard Blackwood." The voice that had destroyed his career 12 hours earlier now carried a tone Marcus had never heard before, desperation thinly disguised as professional courtesy. "Mr. Blackwood, I think there may have been some misunderstandings about your departure from Meridian. I'd like to discuss how we might resolve this situation in a way that's mutually beneficial." Marcus looked out his kitchen window at the San Francisco skyline, where the same towers that had glowed with possibility the night before now seemed to pulse with a different kind of energy. This was the moment Sarah had prepared him for, when power realized it had overplayed its hand and came seeking terms of surrender. "I'm listening." "We're prepared to offer you a consulting position to help with the MindBridge technical transition. Very generous compensation, of course, and we could discuss retroactive bonus payments for your contributions to the project." "What kind of consulting?" "Whatever you think is appropriate. You clearly understand the system better than anyone. We just need to get through this temporary technical difficulty." I almost laughed. Temporary technical difficulty. As if the complete breakdown of their flagship product was nothing more than a software glitch that could be patched over the weekend. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm not sure you understand the situation you're in." "What do you mean?" "The quantum entanglement protocols aren't just a feature of the MindBridge system. They're the foundation that makes everything else possible. Without access to the original patent holder's authentication codes, your device is essentially an expensive paperweight. And even if you somehow reverse-engineered my algorithms, which would take months or years, you'd still be violating federal patent law." Silence stretched across the phone line for nearly 30 seconds.
When Blackwood spoke again, his voice had lost all pretense of corporate politeness. "What do you want?" "I want recognition for my parents' research. I want proper attribution for my innovations, and I want every researcher you've screwed over to receive the compensation they earned." That's not possible. The legal complications alone."
Then I guess you'll have to explain to your investors why their $300 million investment is worthless? Marcus hung up the phone and immediately called Sarah, who answered before the first ring finished. How did it go? He's scared. Really, really scared. Good. Are you ready for phase 2? Marcus smiled, feeling something that had been missing from his life for months, the sense that he was finally fighting back against a system that had tried to break him. What did you have in mind? Remember when I said about theater? Time for the second act. Marcus Chen's journey begins as a brilliant biomedical engineer whose groundbreaking work on quantum entanglement protocols for neural interfaces became the foundation for Meridian Biotech's flagship product, MindBridge. The technology, originally based on theoretical research by Marcus's deceased parents, Dr. James and Dr. Linda Chen, promised to revolutionize treatment for patients with paralysis and neurological disorders by creating stable, long-term connections between the brain and external devices. Working at Meridian Biotech, Marcus had developed the crucial algorithms that made neural interfaces viable for extended use. However, his relationship with the company soured when CEO Richard Blackwood implemented increasingly exploitative practices. The breaking point came when Marcus was fired, just 24 hours before his $85,000 performance bonus was scheduled to vest, in what appeared to be a calculated move to avoid paying earned compensation while retaining his innovations. The termination was particularly egregious because Marcus had filed patent number 11,247,891 for his quantum entanglement protocols 3 months before even joining Meridian. The patent was based entirely on his parents' research, developed using his own equipment at MIT and documented in his personal laboratory notebooks. Yet Meridian's executives believed they could claim ownership of the technology through employment contracts and corporate legal maneuvering. Marcus's firing fired back spectacularly during a crucial MindBridge demonstration for FDA officials and potential investors. Without Marcus present to manage the quantum entanglement protocols, the neural interface system failed catastrophically during a live demonstration with patient Maria Santos. The failure wasn't just technical, it was a complete breakdown of the technology that Meridian had claimed to own and understand. The demonstration failure triggered a massive stock collapse, with Meridian's valuation plummeting by nearly $400 million in a single day. The incident exposed the company's fundamental dependence on technology they had never legally owned and didn't fully comprehend. Media coverage was devastating, with financial press calling it the fastest biotech collapse in history and medical journals questioning whether Meridian had ever possessed the expertise to bring neural interfaces to market. Marcus's response was swift and devastating. Represented by legendary patent attorney Patricia Patterson, he filed suit against Meridian for patent infringement and wrongful termination. The evidence was overwhelming. Time-stamped laboratory notebooks, witness statements from his MIT doctoral advisor, and documentation proving that his breakthrough work predated his employment at Meridian by nearly 8 months. The legal case revealed the full scope of Meridian's misconduct. The company had built their entire $500 million enterprise around stolen technology, using Marcus's algorithms for every aspect of the MindBridge system, while systematically denying him recognition and compensation. Without the quantum entanglement protocols, long-term neural interfaces were scientifically impossible, a fact that became painfully obvious during the failed demonstration. Patterson's settlement demands went beyond individual compensation. She required Meridian to establish a $50 million fund to compensate other researchers who had been terminated before receiving earned benefits, implement new intellectual property policies, and provide full recognition of Marcus's contributions. The alternative was a federal patent infringement lawsuit seeking $200 to $300 million in damages, plus legal fees that could have bankrupted the company entirely.
Prioritized medical outcomes over corporate profits. The center was designed around the radical principle that researchers and patients should be partners in the healing process, with intellectual property policies that actually respected the people who created innovations. The journey transformed Marcus from a corporate employee focused on technical challenges into an advocate for research integrity and patient-centered care. His partner, Sarah, a physics teacher, became instrumental in developing educational outreach programs that brought neural interface concepts to underserved communities and inspired the next generation of scientists. The Chen Center model proved that alternative approaches to medical research could be both ethically superior and practically effective. Within months, they were treating dozens of patients while conducting cutting-edge research that advanced the entire field. The center's success attracted venture capital, government funding, and international attention as proof that innovation could serve human dignity rather than shareholder profits. Maria Santos, the patient who had suffered through the Meridian demonstration failure, became one of the center's greatest success stories. The patient-centered approach addressed not just her physical rehabilitation, but the psychological and emotional aspects of neural interface therapy. Her recovery became a symbol of what the technology could accomplish when developed with integrity and compassion. The ripple effects extended far beyond the Chen Center. Richard Blackwood, ousted from Meridian after the collapse, eventually established a $10 million foundation to support independent research by scientists seeking to maintain ownership of their innovations. His transformation from corporate exploiter to research advocate illustrated the potential for systemic change even among those who had perpetuated problematic practices. Meridian itself underwent complete restructuring under new leadership that implemented the researcher-friendly policies that should have existed from the beginning. The company became a hybrid between traditional corporation and research cooperative, with scientist employees holding equity stakes and intellectual property rights that couldn't be eliminated through arbitrary termination. The Chen model was adopted by hundreds of research institutions worldwide, creating a parallel ecosystem to traditional biotech that prioritized patient outcomes and researcher autonomy. The approach influenced legislation in dozens of countries and established new frameworks for ethical innovation that balanced scientific excellence with social responsibility. Marcus's contributions received ultimate recognition when he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine, shared with Dr. Jennifer Walsh and posthumously with his parents. The committee recognized not just the technical achievements, but the ethical frameworks that had transformed medical research and development. The quantum entanglement protocols continued evolving, enabling neural interface applications that extended far beyond the original scope. Researchers worldwide used modified versions to treat depression, enhance learning, maintain cognitive function in elderly patients, and explore consciousness enhancement technologies. Each application demonstrated the power of innovation developed through ethical practices. Sarah's role evolved from high school physics teacher to director of the Global Neural Rehabilitation Initiative, a United Nations-sponsored program providing neural interface therapy to underserved populations worldwide while training local researchers. Their work proved that breakthrough technologies could address global health inequality while creating opportunities for human potential on an unprecedented scale.
The story spans 25 years, following Marcus from his initial corporate betrayal through retirement. His children, Elena and James, both became scientists working to extend their grandparents' theoretical framework into new frontiers of neural interface technology and quantum consciousness research. Dr. Elena Vasquez, Marcus's mentor and collaborator, spent her career advocating for researcher rights and patient-centered care. Her influence shaped a generation of neural interface innovators who understood that science was fundamentally about service to human possibility rather than corporate profits. The Chen Institute for Ethical Innovation at MIT became a training ground for biomedical engineers who learned to balance technical excellence with social responsibility. The Institute's motto, "Innovation achieves its highest purpose when it serves human dignity," embodied principles that influenced research practices worldwide. Marcus Chen's story demonstrates that individual acts of courage can create systemic change when they're grounded in clear principles and sustained commitment. His refusal to accept corporate theft didn't just secure personal justice. It established new models for how breakthrough discoveries could be developed, owned, and shared. The quantum entanglement protocols that began as his parents' theoretical research evolved into technologies helping millions of people worldwide. But the deeper legacy was proof that researchers united around shared values could overcome corporate exploitation and create institutions that honored both scientific excellence and human dignity. The patent dispute that started with a single firing became a 25-year journey that transformed medical research, established new legal frameworks for intellectual property protection, and proved that innovation achieves its highest potential when it serves human consciousness rather than corporate profits. Marcus's story illustrates how brilliant minds committed to integrity can not only survive institutional corruption, but can build better alternatives that serve humanity's deepest needs and highest aspirations.